let's start here at the beginning because I ask all the candidates this, and I'm always interested of the answer. Why did you make this decision to run for city council? I mean, you have experience in the past, whether it be as a district manager, working in political offices, working in the community. But why make the decision right now to run for city council for this particular district?
Thank you for that question. It's actually a very good question. As you know, we're at a turning point right now during this pandemic, and we see the growing inequality across our city. And I've seen firsthand how much it's taken a toll on our community, especially the trust in government. So I feel like more than ever, we need to make sure that community voices are represented in City Hall. We need someone that understands the obstacles of remote learning. I'm a mother of two. I understand that. The fear of losing your job. I understand that. And just the angst of not knowing where your next meal is coming from. I've gone through that. We need people that can deliver back to our communities, right? A neighbor, a homegrown leader. I was born and raised here. A mother, someone who's fiercely been fighting for this community, and someone with a track record. When I think about my kids and I think about the future that they'll inherit, I want somebody like me representing them, right? I've dedicated my whole life to public service for the last 16 years, ranging from government, nonprofits, and like you said, my current role as district manager of Community Board 7. I see firsthand the crumbling infrastructure that affects my neighbors and myself every day, and how long my communities like mine have been starved of much needed resources and opportunities to excel, whether that's housing and education. All that to say, I work hard every day, so those working families like mine are represented and cared for. I'm running because I've lived through those experiences. I have the work experience in District 15 that we need in City Hall. Right now, we're going through a crisis and we can't afford someone on training wheels. We need to make sure that we have lived experiences and worked experiences going to City Hall. I know the city agencies. I understand the city's budget. I am ready to lead and I'm ready to work for us as I have.
Ischia, as you've spoken with people in the district, not just for this campaign, but in previous years and obviously leading up to this point, we're going through a lot right now, obviously, but what has been a major issue that has come up time and time again when you speak to potential constituents here in the district? What do you think the biggest issue is to them?
Affordability of housing. I think that's the biggest crisis here, living in a home that you can't afford. A good percentage of my district is rent burdened, but also coupled with that, you also see bad actors, bad landlords that don't maintain their buildings. They don't have heat, they don't have hot water, right? I have some Michelamas, I have some Nitras, and they're all going through the same issues. That's the consistent theme here, among many other issues, of course, but housing is what revolves around our quality of life, right? Housing is a huge determinant on how we live.
Okay, so let's start with housing then, right off the bat. How do we address this? How do we deal with making sure that people, not only can afford to pay their rent, but don't get penalized for what's going on with rent now during this pandemic and not get evicted from where they live, and make sure they can continue to live here and afford it?
Yeah. So let's start there. Let's talk about investing in eviction prevention programs like the right to counsel. How much money you make for a living should not determine your ability to have legal representation. I think that is a big investment that we need to do in City Hall. Preventing eviction through this program is less expensive than subsidizing folks into the shelter system. That's a good way to start, among many other things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It absolutely is. And, it's also the other thing that also comes up with housing, too, is just the quality of the housing that we currently have, whether it be the conditions of NYCHA buildings now and what people are already paying to live in those NYCHA buildings. I mean, what would you do from city council to try to bring up the standard of living here in the district?
Well, for starters, is accountability, demanding that the federal government invest in our infrastructure, especially in NYCHA developments. These are years of disinvestment. I was born and raised in NYCHA. This is not a brand new issue. This is years and years of neglect. And we need to make sure that we hold our federal government accountable. We need to make sure that as council members, we introduce those resolutions of accountability. But in terms of infrastructure, NYCHA is not the only crumbling infrastructure that we have in the districts, right? What I mentioned earlier, we have tons of development here, whether it's new or existing infrastructure, that are poorly built, right? I've seen developments within 6 months have tons of 311 complaints. That is not acceptable. We need to make sure that we hold developers accountable and that the buildings are being built, sustainably, and and also, healthy buildings. We need to make sure that, considering the Bronx has such an asthma rate, we need to do the right thing when development is created as well.
Aisha, whoever wins this special election is going to be thrown right in the middle of this vaccine rollout that's going on right now and have to address the issues here in the district. What are your thoughts on what's been going on with the vaccine rollout? Are they getting it to the people in the district who need it? Do they need more access, more education? What are your thoughts on it? And what would you do if elected?
All of that. So language access is a big deal in my district. And it has been for quite some time. I know growing up, my first language was Spanish and access wasn't always readily available. And as I knock on doors and I engage with my neighbors, and especially the senior population, that is the access that they don't have. How can I get this vaccine? And I'm always spending time on the doors, making sure that I walk them through that process. So language access, not just Spanish, right? Spanish is predominantly the second language here spoken in the district and across the borough, but let's not forget other communities, right? We have a South Asian community that's growing here in this borough and in this district that we need to make sure that we create awareness around those issues, especially access to vaccines. So I think that that's the major start. I think that as a city and as a state, we've done great things. We've passed the green light bill, but again, it has not guaranteed us language access. We have small business owners that are affected by the lack of a language access. So, and the vaccine is no different. So I think that as elected officials and as community leaders, we need to do our best to communicate and do mutual conversational aids where we share this information. I think that this is a responsibility that we have. And as a council member, just ensuring that all agencies are partnering up to get this information out as soon as possible. And, I mentioned small businesses, but that's both small businesses are the pillars here. They're heavily populated by the immigrant community, and they're the ones that have least access. So it's making sure that we start there, going to our local businesses, letting them know that vaccines are available and this is how they can obtain them, going to our local nonprofits that are serving these marginalized communities and using them as pillars and tools to access this information. Reality is that there's an angst and fear when it comes to immigration, right? So we want to make sure that they're getting the nonprofits that are already serving this community are the ones that get first access, right? Or at least information that they have trusted sites to go to.
And you mentioned small businesses there, and in the district now, that the problem, either you have empty storefronts that we're not sure what we're going to do with now going forward, or you have the businesses that have managed to stay open, but they're struggling to keep their doors open right now. They look to their city council member for help and assistance. What kind of help and assistance do you feel you'd be able to offer them?
Well, I mean, this is not a brand new issue either, right? All COVID did was highlight the issues or inequalities our small business were facing. One of the things that they face is making sure that they are able to compete, right? Reality is during this pandemic, e-commerce did very well and it was doing well before. So how does small business services work for us? How does it work for our small businesses? And it's being able to navigate them through these grants, through these funding. Only about 1% of small businesses in the Bronx were able to benefit from the loans, right? Make no mistake that that's the issue, is going back to language access, awareness. We need to make sure that we empower our small businesses by helping them compete with technological services. I would say that would be a good and healthy beginning so they can compete with the e-commerce business that is going now. And of course, rent control is a big deal as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what's going to be the commercial rent going forward and how this is going to all play out moving forward, things need to be taken into account. Another thing, going through some of your campaign materials and looking through one issue that I noticed that comes up is you mentioned about zip codes not determining your life outcome. And I think when we talk about something like education, that comes into play even more. That obviously we saw during the pandemic, different parts of the city got to deal with this differently and had different access to different services, especially when it came to remote learning. How would you address those kind of situations here from City Council if elected?
Right. So let's talk about my district, for instance, right? School District 10 has the third most dense district. These are not, again, the pandemic only highlighted the bigger issues that we have here. We need to make sure that we properly assess every single family to make sure that they have what they need. A lot of our families did not have Wi-Fi, did not have smart devices, right? These schools have not been properly funded. We have used a formula that we just renamed over time, which is the fair student formula, which is not fair at all, and it's not equitable. Not every school is receiving 100%. I have tons of schools in my district that only get about 60%. Funding for teachers' choice, which is a big deal in a community like mine that's heavily impoverished, where it would allow teachers to come out of pocket and get reimbursed for school supplies. And that is something that was never baselined, and it was completely removed from the city, from the city's budget during this pandemic. And we have to learn to restore these services. And we need to make sure that when we talk about equity, that we make sure that communities like mine that are serving low income communities, especially people of color, that we're getting 100% of our funding. Because the only time the city practiced equity is for cuts.
Let's talk about cuts a little bit, a couple of cuts, because the biggest cut that's been coming up in conversation has been regarding police reform and regarding the NYPD and whether or not the police should take more cuts to their budget. Where do you stand on police reform here in the district? And also, what do you feel the role of the NYPD should be when it comes to public safety?
I think we definitely need to reimagine public safety. I think there's years of systematic racism. I think that for years we've allowed folks to come into our communities and criminalize poverty. So I think that we need to start on a local level to help teach people that, groups like the precinct councils they need to be revamped, right? I think that we need to talk about community and police engagement. How do we navigate those relationships? In terms of divestment, I do believe that the $1 billion cuts were essential at the time. We can't continue to give cuts to education. So redirecting that funding into our public school system to increase mental health professionals, paraprofessionals in our schools. We need these resources. We don't need to police our children. We need to give them the resources that they need to excel. So I think reimagining what public safety looks like in our community is a conversation that needs to be a collective effort. Everybody has had a different experience with policing. And we need to make sure that we continue to have conversations and look at what the future of policing looks like in communities like mine, and not criminalize poverty. I think that that's the most important thing. I think having police that look like us, that come from our communities, are essential. I think when police come from different areas, they tend to criminalize our lifestyle and not understand that, it's years of systematic failure, really.
And when you now go forward here, obviously, if you make the cuts or you do what you need to do, there's also another part of this, and that's reaching out to the community and making sure that you keep people from. You try to limit the violence. Obviously, you try to bring it down, and obviously, a lot of people talk about reaching out to the community and involving the community in that. How do we address that kind of an issue here from City Council?
I think investing in cure violence programs. I think they're amazing. We have several here in the district. One of my favorites is Bragg, making sure that we employ former gang members, it's a form of re-entry. When we want to build our socioeconomic status here in the district, is be investing into those programs. I work closely with them. I see the work that they do. And I think that that's a great start. I think that that's where the true investment needs to go to, into these cure violence programs. I sit on the board for Bragg, and I can tell you firsthand that I am amazed about the work they continue to do, but the funding needs to go to them so they can continue to give back, because they also they hire locally, which is very important.
Ischia, how important is it to get the transit system up and running in a way that really benefits the people here in the district when it comes to the MTA and obviously access to other parts of the city?
I think it's very important. Recently, the Bronx bus redesign was not designed for Bronxites, which is something that I was in the forefront fighting for. I'll give you an example. VX34 is a bus that services a senior development that I have, the biggest one. And that bus takes them to get their healthcare services over at Montefiore. And they were trying to move that bus like blocks and blocks away where they would not have access to. Some of them have walkers and don't have access to Access a Ride or other types of services and rely on the MTA. So I think that access is important. I think taking into consideration vulnerable New Yorkers, especially disabled New Yorkers, is important. Our school age population as well, but also an expedient services. An expedient, clean service is important to us. There's an e-ticket plan that I believe is in Atlantic, Brooklyn, right? I think that's something we should explore, which gives us affordable access to the Metro North as well. That you can use the Metro North and the New York City MTA system. So I think that dual access is important. Also, infrastructure. Let's talk about green infrastructure. We need to move on to electric buses. We need to save our city, and we have to learn to do that from the inside out. So.
Yeah, no, that the green infrastructure and environmental concerns is something that I don't think gets talked about enough when we talk about what we're trying to do here and move forward here. What other kind of, are you have any other kind of policies or ideas as far as moving us forward into the future in a green way?
Yes, I would say supporting more proposals in the city to reduce diesel pollution and other pollutants that are contaminating our water. Pushing the city to require and incentivize waste removal companies to adopt low income emission technologies, which is something that we've been lagging on. And just reduce our reliance on diesel trucks, which is another big deal that we've been lagging on, focusing on reducing the overall waste that we send to landfills and incinerators, and ensuring waste processing and transfer facilities are distributed in a more equitable way. The Bronx has the highest rates of asthma. Make no mistake, it's due to a lot of this. I know that the Bronx River Alliance has done a great job at helping with that, but we need to provide more green strategies, especially in Black and Brown communities that have been affected by pollution for decades now.
Aisha, two more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. First one's a fun one. Okay. What is a fun fact about you that the voters may not know that you think they might be interested to know about you?
I shared earlier, I was born and raised here in Ischia by my abuelita, and we went through a lot of struggles. We had to roll pennies just to make sure we made ends meet, and I had to leave high school in order to be able to provide, but I went on to pursue my education. I have an associate's and a bachelor's from John Jay. But I share this story because it's a connection, right? It's what my neighbors go through and continuously go through. And I want to make sure that you have someone in City Hall that understands those issues and has the experience to represent them. And it's not a story that's unique to me, but very too familiar to my neighbors. And I want to make sure that that pipeline ends today. That's a fact.
Okay. And I think that might be similar to my last question, which is, this is an election with a lot of different candidates in this special election. And, it is ranked choice voting. So people are going to get to pick more than one candidate. What do you want voters to remember about you, have in the back of their head that they know about you when they head in there to vote, so that they make sure when they see your name, they fill in that bubble next to your name?
That I've been here, that I've been fighting for us for the last 16 years. I've dedicated my whole life to public service. I didn't wake up yesterday and decided to fight for us. I've been doing it since day one because of that pain that I personally suffered. And I know that for a fact that I am that person that we need, that it's unapologetically a fierce advocate of this district and is unbossed and is a mom, someone that everything that we've been going through that has been exacerbated through this pandemic, I'm going through. I'm also that mom that's been dealing with remote learning, working full time and running for office. And I'm doing that because I believe in us. I believe this district has everything it needs to thrive. And I'm here for it to make sure that we are in the forefront and we get the services that not only we need, but we deserve.